Eric, we got Nick and Jamie on the line. What do you want to ask them?
So from an asset management perspective, what systems and processes must you have in place before starting due diligence and why?
The answer to that would be you have to have your team in place. We're both pilots and we have a checklist. And part of that checklist is to have your ground crew taking care of your aircraft. So it's like, how do you get that person to get those things all ready for you? I think that you have to have the legal aspect, you have to have insurance, all that stuff. That's all important. But those are usually a few phone calls, a few discussions. The property management from the get-go should be involved in the acquisition.
Hey, I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And this podcast is different from everything else out there. I bring together new and aspiring investors on each and every episode and let the aspiring investors ask the questions that they need answered. And if you're an aspiring investor yourself, you probably have the same questions. So before you get to this episode that we have prepared for you, make sure you hit the subscribe button and that little notification bell to make sure you get notified every time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe, and I'm very excited for today's show. We've got some amazing guests on the line with us. We typically have two on our Ask the Expert, but today we have three guests with us. We've got Nic and Jamie Cooper and Eric Lizama. Welcome, guys. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
All right, this is going to be a lot of fun. And incidentally, I think most people listening will figure this out later, but I'll just throw it out there. We do have two helicopter pilots talking with us today. I've told them, very many times not to start nerding out on aviation while we're on the podcast. Teasing, but I'm sure we'll keep it to multifamily. But if you guys want to talk aviation. No big deal. Anyway, Nic, Jamie, you're up to bat first. Tell us a little bit about yourselves.
So we got into apartment investing about 4 years ago, but Nic was a landlord for about 17 years prior in single family. And we currently live in San Diego, California, and kind of the transition from single family to multifamily, you can probably.
Yeah, so pretty much like most folks in the military, you buy a house and you move. So by default, you become a landlord. Kind of after moving a few times, I had a few properties and I just managed it myself. And I kind of realized, how do I get bigger? And you actually did the math one day in the back of a napkin. And you're like, I'm making like $100 a month after all my expenses. I'm like, this is not a business. This is like a hobby. So this is pretty much about 4 years ago when I told Jamie one day, I'm like, hey, we should probably buy an apartment complex. And she's like, you are crazy, so I had to sell my, at the time, girlfriend, soon to be fiance, that this was the way and this was the best way forward. And what really kind of moved it a bit for me is just realizing just the scale of it. It took me 17 years of managing my own properties to get about two or three. Yeah. And within a month or so, I had 24 units. That's what I kind of realized, like, whoa, this is powerful. And for her, like, what were your kind of reservations on this?
I mean, everything. He had been a helicopter pilot at that point for almost 20 years. And that was his career. That was his world. And now he wants to go buy an apartment complex. I obviously thought it was a little bit out there. But if you know Nic, and anyone who knows him knows he doesn't jump into anything. He's very calculated. It makes sense that he's a pilot. He does everything with intention. And when he made that statement, I knew it hadn't come out of left field. He had been building up resources and educating himself and figuring out how he could do this successfully for months/years prior. And this was just him finally voicing it, now trying to get me on board. Though it did come out of left field, he had a plan. He got on a plane and started going to work looking for an apartment complex and had a whole checklist of criteria that needed to be met. Yeah, that was kind of the transition from being just a pilot to him realizing, hey, in the future, I'm going to likely be married and have kids. And this isn't the safest or greatest career for someone who wants to be home and not be working weird hours and be gone for weeks or days.
Or months or years.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
He had deployed like almost 10 times at that point. And when we met, I said, I'm looking to have a husband who's around. I'm not looking to get married to have a roommate who I see every few months. And I think he has voiced that was kind of motivation to like, okay, great. How will I make a career that doesn't require me to be gone all the time?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of parallels there to kind of what I went through as well. Same thing, you move, the military says, hey, you're moving here. And you're like, your choice is yes, I'll go, or I'll be unemployed. That's really the choices you have. And it took us 17 years to pick up 3 properties. And I had to do a lot of convincing to buy the first single family house with my wife, and there was a lot of, she grew up with the idea that you buy a house and you live in it. You don't buy a house to rent out. And we had orders to leave an area when we bought our first house and turned it into a rental. And there was a lot of convincing there, and similar conversation when we wanted to go into multifamily, a lot of convincing. It's done, we've done fairly well with it since. But one thing I will say, Nic, thanks for your service. I know that at least in the Marine Corps, helicopter pilots are probably deployed more than anyone else. 10 deployments, that's a lot of time overseas, a lot of time away from home, and probably a lot of time on a ship is what I'm assuming.
It was the first part. I shifted to not be on the ship as much my last decade or so. I probably had about 2+ years on a ship.
Okay.
He gave the Navy a lot of time, a lot of his life.
I was a Marine and I accumulated a full year of sea service. I didn't want to do that, but ended up spending a full year on different ships, and it's a different world. You talked about the decision going into multifamily. I like that Jamie used the word checklist, because I don't think pilots do anything without checklists. But let's talk about the struggles getting in and what it took to get that first 24 unit.
I think the struggle was when you're in residential, for the most part, everyone is an amateur. You're kind of doing it on the side and whatnot. When you get into the larger properties, it's professional level. How do you break into that? And I was like, well, I was trained to be a pilot. So how do I figure out, the education and who's going to train me? It's like you have to dive into podcasts, books, those type of things. But also, like, what I also got was join a mastermind. You have a mentor that actually like can help you like on call. So those type of things is like, you got to be professional.
Yeah, we've invested an enormous amount of money on educating ourselves how to do this successfully. We have some friends who reached out and they're like, "Oh, I want to do this. Can you tell me, what to do?" And I wish it was that easy when I've been his wife and be able to see the behind the scenes for the last 4+ years, like the tens of thousands of dollars, upwards of a 6-figure amount now invested in coaching, invested in masterminds, invested in weekend workshops where we fly across the country. There's been such a big time and money investment that it's hard to just give someone, a elevator speech on how to go buy an apartment complex successfully and take investors. It's not possible.
I mean, the reality is, if it was easy to do, everybody be doing it. There is a significant barrier to entry. And I like how you mentioned it's before, $100 a month real estate was a hobby. To get into multifamily, you've got to switch your mindset from hobby to business. It is fairly easy to buy a single family home and be a hobbyist and rent out 1 or 2 or 3 properties. But to make a business out of it, that takes a lot more commitment. One thing I've noticed is people ask me a lot about coaching. I did one of those high ticket, coaching programs. They asked me if it was worth it. And I had a moment of clarity once. And I think that the biggest thing that I got out of the coaching program is I myself committed to a course of action. And part of it was writing a $25,000 check, which for us at the time was a lot of money, and it still is a fair amount of money, but it was at the time the single largest check I had ever written. And I'm thinking $25,000, man, I better really be committed to this. And that's, I think for me, that's one thing that helped me commit. And if it wasn't for that commitment, would I ever have bought an apartment? I don't know. I may still be on the podcast junkie train right now if I didn't.
That.
No, I think you're right. It is a mindset that you have to get yourself in that professional mindset of like, I got to figure this out, because it's not just other zero. It's more people involved, more systems involved. You have, more taxes. You have to deal with, more legal issues. So all those things kind of take into account. Like, you can be a hobbyist, but to get really scalable, you have to be a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need professional help. And something I pointed to in 2020, we paid our attorney over $100,000.
Oh yeah.
And that's a lot of money, and it's still a lot of commitment, but you need to involve the professionals as well. And that's something, I don't think I would have paid an attorney to do anything when my portfolio consisted of 3 single family homes. It would have been, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to figure out how to do it myself. And maybe it would have turned out well, maybe it wouldn't have.
It could have cost you a lot more. It was, like I said, professionals are going to save you money. Amateurs like yourself or someone doing it doesn't know what they're doing, it's going to cost you money.
Yeah, could cost you a lot of money in the long run. And I probably left a lot of money on the table with those couple of rental properties. Let's talk a little bit about, motivation, and then we're going to go into, a little more specifics on the property that you guys have. What is your guys's big burning why?
I think I'll take this one. So definitely it's my wife next to me. I mean, she is 100% my why and why I do it. You have to have your spouse on board. She's going to have to, I'm very blessed and grateful that I have my spouse actually involved in the business. But at the minimum, you have to have your spouse buy into this. Like, it can't just be a one man, a one woman show trying to make this happen. Like, your motivation has to be you're making a better life for your family. And I think for me, Jamie and Brian, you touched on it as well, is that I had a very dangerous job, and it's not something it's a very safe endeavor. And this is something that, pivoting from being a pilot to multifamily is a lot different, but also you just got to bring the knowledge that you have to that aspect of it. So what kind of systems can you bring in? And just for motivation, like, you just got to realize every day why you're doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And something I'll point out, a lot of people don't realize it, but aviators, I know in the Marine Corps, I'm sure it's the same in the Army and Navy, they get paid more. That they have, aviation career pay that they receive. And if you look at the history, the reason they get that is because they are in a dangerous profession. It's to compensate them for the added danger they face every day. And it's there's a lot of mishaps. And when you get into an emergency, flying at 1,000 feet, it's a lot different than getting into an emergency, driving a car where four wheels are on the ground. But anyway, very, very dangerous line of work. And once again, hats off to both of you guys on here for, wiggling the stick a little bit. But tell us a little bit about what you guys own and how things have gone so far.
Yeah. So we now have 172 units. I always, Nick's the numbers guy. I always round down or up. But yeah, we have 172 units that we have bought over the last 4 years. And it started with our first property where Nick sold the one property in San Diego. And very quickly he jumped on a plane and was gone for, I think, 4 weeks, looking in different areas to identify where we were going to do a 1031 exchange into our first apartment complex. And then since then, we have done an additional JV deals and syndications where we are currently running some syndications, and then we've contributed asset management and money raising for some of them. But yeah, it's been a wild ride to go from just purchasing, the two of us, an apartment complex 4 years ago, to raising millions of dollars and running a deal and being the main people that are, the pillars of operating that property after being able to successfully have done that with our first JV deal.
So you can probably tell from Jamie is that her background is sales. So you got to find someone that is strong where you don't have strengths, and vice versa. So she's definitely the person who's able to do the sales and those relationships. And that's what really matters. And I am more of the Excel nerd, the numbers person, and the writer.
His brain works like a computer. You need one of those. I can barely operate a computer. His brain is the computer. So
I'm Jamie's full-time tech support.
That's true.
Yeah, forever.
I've been in medical sales for the last decade, so thankfully it didn't require much online time.
I have 2 degrees in math, and the way I explain spreadsheets to other people is it's like the Matrix. I'm like Keanu Reeves, looking into the numbers and seeing pictures emerge. So
that's exactly how Nick's Excel sheets are.
Yeah, you need somebody like that on your team. Some people who look at Excel spreadsheets and don't see anything at all. Those are the ones that
should not be running the deal.
should not be doing the numbers. Is what that's like. So you need people who can do both. You need the sales, you need the marketing people, but you also need the numbers people. And looks like with you guys, you have both under one roof. So perfect situation there.
I think kind of what Jamie touched on is that we sold our last property in San Diego. I was able to buy, I mean, granted, San Diego is a very expensive market. And I was able to buy 24 units in another market near Ohio.
Yep.
So just that scale.
And the success that came from that first property, you know, some call it luck, some call it, I don't know, whatever you may call it, but it's definitely been our unicorn property where we did a lot of due diligence. We did a lot of research, and most of all, you know, we put ourselves out there.
Yeah.
We ended up finding this property from Nick jumping on a plane and literally going everywhere, and had a pretty stringent policy on how he would look in specific cities, from looking at the crime rate to looking at population growth. Is it in a flood zone? All of these different things. But what ended up finding us this property was just reaching out to someone who had found the property, and, you know, they didn't have the money. And so we had the money. We were able to purchase that property, and we recently did last year.
We did a capital event, so a refi, and that allowed me to retire and do this full time. And I think kind of the biggest thing that Jamie kind of is talking about here is you're that one phone call away from that deal, that success. That one deal will set you free. And this deal set me free from the military. Not that I was in prison, but it allowed me to transition to something else that, and no, nothing against someone who wants to still fly, but I wanted something that I was here. Like, I'm next to my wife here on a Tuesday at 12:30 Pacific Standard Time. I'm here.
Well, I'll point out, and this is something that, you know, I think everybody in the military realizes, number one, it's a young man's game. And when I say man, you know, both genders included. I wish there was a gender neutral
we know
term
what you
in
meant.
English, right? But it is a young man's game, you know, and everybody eventually gets out, you know. So it's something that it took me like 15 years to finally have a mentor that helped me see that. And yeah, eventually you're going to get out. It doesn't matter if you serve 4 years or 20 years. Eventually the end comes for everybody. But you know, whether you get out at 2 or 20, it doesn't matter. But you have to plan for it, and you have to be able to do something else after your military service ends. So yeah, no hard feelings here. I did the same thing. You know, I used real estate as my vehicle to get out. I started planning about 3 years before I hit my 20-year mark, and made it my goal to be able to retire as soon as I hit that 20-year mark. So and I did. So
I think also, Brian, you know, what's awesome is you guys did get to retire on your own terms. And in this career, you know, it's kind of like the elephant in the room. A lot of people don't get to retire on their own terms because, like you alluded to, it is very unsafe. So if you get to retire on your terms and safely, that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely is. And that's, retiring on your own terms. You mentioned that you're sitting next to your husband at, 12:30 Pacific time on a weekday. I think the big thing for me is I'm living in Idaho Falls. You know, it's not a place where there's a gigantic job market, but we're in the same neighborhood as my wife's two sisters, and her brother's in the next neighborhood over. So, that's what it's bought us is, number one, I was able to exit the Marine Corps on my own terms, but number two, I can live where I want to live. And really, I should say I can live with where my wife wants to live. So that's anyway, that's an important note. Thanks for bringing that up. It does bring you the flexibility, and people who do well can exit their W-2, whatever it is, on their own terms. So last question, and then we'll bring Eric on. What's next for the two of you?
I think for us, it's going to be getting larger, is more scale. So I think for Jamie and I is that we are still looking and actively buying. And I think for us, it's just, we're looking for, new partners, new opportunities. Obviously we live in California, not what we say in a deal state. We're in more of a capital or money state.
Yep.
So we're looking at great markets that are growing. All the things that Jamie mentioned before is that we're looking to partner and expand.
Yep.
Awesome.
And we're looking to continue to make our current portfolio thrive, whether we continue to go deeper into this recession, non-recession, whatever the news is calling it now, but
whatever it is.
Yeah.
It is. I think you're right. It is the biggest thing I've talked to our management is that tightening up what's to come. So that is, tightening up on delinquencies and making sure that these properties that we have are going to weather the storm and having the adequate reserves, which everyone who has multifamily needs to have. Not a should, it's a shall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To go into a Navy term, I think now's time to, get the chain gang out on the flight deck and make sure those helicopters are secure. So
That's a good one.
I've been on that
Batten down the
chain.
hatches.
Yeah, I've been on that chain gang team before. So that was one of my deployments. But for people who are not familiar with the reference, when you park a helicopter on a carrier or any ship, you chain it down to the deck. And when you start going into, rough seas, you add more chains, so you may have, 3 chains per point or 4 chains per point or whatever, but it's something you do to prepare for the rough weather. So anyway, Nick, I knew you'd understand that term, but
I got you, Brian. We're here.
Yep. Just had to make sure everyone else did. And anyway, that said, let's transition a little bit and bring Eric on. So Eric, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I really appreciate it. And Nick and Jamie, thanks for your time as well.
Absolutely. Just out of curiosity, do you ever chain, Apaches to the deck for any reason?
We do. At the end of the day, we always chain our aircraft down. And then over the weekends, depending on the weather, we would hangar them because there are microbursts, there's thunderstorms. If you don't chain them down, helicopters will flip.
All right. I did not know that. I've never actually been around the helicopters on the flight line. So
absolutely. Just 2 months ago, one of our posts in Kansas, there was one thunderstorm that passed by and there were 34 damaged helicopters.
Jeez. Wow.
So it happens a lot.
Wow. Okay. So there we go. Something I learned new today. Do us a favor. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name's Eric Lizama. I am 40 years old right now. I live in Central Texas. I'm married to my amazing wife. It is our anniversary. So happy anniversary. 2 amazing kids, 3 and 5. I was born and raised in Guam, Pacific Islands, a U.S. territory. And I was in Guam until I was 25 years old. I joined the Army Reserve when I was 17 in January of 2000 as a military policeman. And then I commissioned from the University of Guam in 2005 and commissioned into the Army. And that's what I've been doing since. I've been flying for the Army ever since. And then in 2013 is really when I started my real estate investing journey. I bought my first house through the VA loan and then a subsequent house after that. Now I own a few single family homes. And in just this year alone, I attended a Bigger Pockets multifamily boot camp and the active duty passive income military multifamily academy. And that is when I made that mental shift to switch from investing in single family to multifamily, because I saw the scalability. I saw the reduction in risk in terms of tenants and everything else, and the tax benefits that come with that. So I'm all in now with multifamily. I'll keep my single families as part of my portfolio, but I'm all in multifamily.
Yeah. And common trend here, a lot of people do invest a lot of money learning the business before jumping in. And it's one of those things where, the difference between single family and multifamily is the difference a lot of times between hobbyists and professionals. You spend that money, you invest that money in yourself so that, you don't make the mistakes that a lot of hobbyists may make. So anyway, just wanted to point that out. So multifamily boot camp from Bigger Pockets, you were in the
ADPI, military multifamily
passive
academy.
Income. There we go.
That's right. And I did get into my first syndication as an LP this year as well.
Awesome.
So learning that from the LP side.
All right. And how has that gone so far?
It's great. I absolutely love it. The company that I'm an LP for, they're amazing. They communicate very well. They're very easy to work with. They keep us updated with the property. Everything's smooth. Love it.
Perfect. Awesome. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, your motivation. What is your big burning why? Why are you doing this?
My big burning why is really to be able to provide for my family. I retire from the Army next year. I don't have to retire, but I hit my 20 years next year, and I am going to leave so that I can get to that financial freedom a little quicker than I would in a regular W-2 than the regular transition. The regular person in my field, they retire from the Army and then they move into a contracted job or a GS job working for the military, and then they work for Department of Defense for another 20 to 40 years, and they still don't reach financial freedom for the most part. Well, I want to get to financial freedom by 2026, for my family. And the other part to that, the other side of the coin to that really is quality of life and being there for my family. Just like Nick and Jamie mentioned earlier, it's Tuesday, 12 o'clock, and they're home together. Being in the military, I'm never home. I'm always away. I barely saw my kids grow up. My wife is essentially a single mother. So that's really my burning why, is to provide for them, and more importantly, be there for them as they grow up, because life is short.
Yeah. And this may be, Debbie Downer moment, but I've got an 11-year-old daughter right now. And when she was young, I was gone a lot. And my wife a couple months ago asked me, "Do you remember when?" And I started thinking about it. And there's like a 3-year gap in her life that I remember almost nothing, and that's kind of one of the downsides to the life that we've all lived. But I think I see a common trend, especially among military members. It's I want my family back. I want my family back, and that's
Absolutely
what pushes a lot of people to do what we do, make massive changes. And also double down the other comment you made. I've seen a lot of people walk out of the Pentagon in a uniform one day and back in a business suit the next, and that's a different idea of financial freedom. I like this idea better, but
I do as well.
Yeah, cool. Well, anyway, Eric, we got Nick and Jamie on the line. What do you want to ask them?
Nick and Jamie, again, thanks for your time. I really do appreciate it. Going into multifamily, I am focusing on asset management. That's my thing. I've been in operations my entire career, and I think that would be a great transition for me when I get into real estate. So all my questions are based off of the asset management perspective. So from an asset management perspective, what systems and processes must you have in place before starting due diligence, and why?
The answer to that would be you have to have your team in place. We're both pilots and we have a checklist. And part of that checklist is to have, your ground crew taking care of your aircraft. So it's like, how do you get that person to get those things all ready for you? I think that you have to have the legal aspect. You have to have, insurance, all that stuff. That's all important. But those are usually a few phone calls, a few discussions. The property management from the get-go should be involved in the acquisition. Like, hey, I'm looking at this property. These are the rents I can get. What do you think? Yes, no. What do you think about my, expenses as far as repairs on this? What do you think? Yes, you have a whole team, but that's probably the most important person or team to get on there.
I'd add to that, it's just, you ask a question about before due diligence, you have to have a really clear picture of what your business plan is going to be. And when you're doing due diligence, you're basically validating a lot of your assumptions. While you're underwriting, you make a lot of assumptions about what your business plan is going to be. How much is it going to cost to renovate the units? That's really an asset management problem, is the renovations. But you're validating all the assumptions you've made in the analysis period and the underwriting period. So if you have a clear picture of what the business plan is going to be, I think that's the most important part. You go in during the due diligence period and you start just going down the checklist, how much do we think it's going to cost? And, oh, by the way, since you have access to the properties, bring the vendors in, bring the contractors in, and validate every line on your spreadsheet.
Yeah, if I'm going to add, Brian, briefly, is that it's all high fives and champagne, the closing table. What matters is when the business plan, that's when you take off. That is when everything happens. That's the mission, is the takeoff. So that is actually what makes it successful, is implementing the plan.
Absolutely.
All right. So thank you for that. Next question I have, what asset management systems or tools have you found to be a game changer? And how has it allowed you to scale without assuming more risk?
We have what's called a pulse. Firstly, we take over a property, it should be weekly at a minimum. And that has all your KPIs or your key performance indicators on there listed out, metrics that you measure, because you have to measure everything, or how to hold people accountable. Just like in the military, What is the goal? I don't know. Here's are the goals. Are we exceeding it? Are we on? Are we below? And let's figure that out. I have it broken out to your goals. Then you have monthly goals, weekly goals.
And just to give some kind of what he's referring to. So on that, it says it holds us and our property management accountable. We have some CapEx projects. We're putting a new gate up, or we're putting a new laundry room. Every week until it's completed, we have progress on that. And we talk about it. We have the cost, we have the timeline, and it holds our property management accountable to make sure, okay, cool, this has been on the list for 4 weeks. Why do we not have a bid? Why do we not have, why isn't this moving forward? Or on the flip side, okay, cool, we had 8 walkthroughs for potential leases and we had 1 lease up. What happened to the 7 other people?
What's the feedback?
Yeah, it really just gives us a pulse on what's happening, because we are not the property managers, but we definitely work hand in hand. And there's definitely a dance between knowing what's going on without being there and having some communication. And this has been, for us, this has been a game changer, just because we then have an idea of really what's going on all fronts.
Love it. Love it. I'm not much of an asset manager, so I can't really add much to that. I'm just taking notes myself. So that's it. No 2 cents from me.
That's a great transition, that because you actually touched on the second part of my question regarding KPIs, or key performance indicators, specifically with your property management company. So Jamie, you've mentioned like CapEx and understanding what's going on, how much you have to have, where the project is, but do you tell your PM company what KPIs are going to be discussed before your call? Or do you ask them like the day of, assuming you're not going into CapEx or anything else? Do you give them an opportunity to do homework, or do you come in fresh?
No. So they have everything beforehand. This is like, hey, this is where we're at. You have access. So it's a Google sheet. And if you want afterwards, I can share it. If everyone emails me, I'll share with my blank sheet for them. So they know these are all the parameters. I say, fill this in. So it's like week 1, fill this in. Week 2, fill this in. So they're going to know what we're talking about. There's no surprises. And then I always have at the end, like, we call it, oh, by the ways, anything else I'm missing on here? What should I add? And they could add it too. So it's a living document. It's not just me saying, this is the plan, follow this. And it's like, hey, if you have something else, add a line, add a row.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point, having them add to it as well, right? Because again, they're the professionals on the ground. They see what's going on day to day. So that's a really great point.
Yeah, I mean, we hopefully, in property management, you hopefully hire a professional who's better at this than you are. And you're just here to communicate back and forth and make sure that the business plan gets executed. But, they have the contacts in each city or state, and they hopefully have the experience if you hire right. And I'd say with the living document, you want to set them up for success. We don't ever want to go into a meeting like, okay, well, this is a quiz. It's like, hey, this is the same expectation every single week, the same document.
Yeah.
So we're setting them up to succeed.
It's not a check, right? I want to give you all the answers.
Yeah.
We
exactly
all sheet together.
Yeah. Something that I've noticed is, back to your question, that you definitely have to be on the same page. They have to know what the scorecard is. They have to know what they're being judged on. So, and if you tell them what your KPIs are, they can tailor their reporting to exactly what you need to know. Exactly. Right. So, inside most professional property management software systems, there is a report for everything. So if there's a KPI specifically that you want to know, they can generate the report for it. And if you tell them what they want, what specifically what you want to know, when they do their weekly reporting, and I do see the weekly reports coming from the property management on our properties, the first page will typically have the KPIs that we're asking for. And the property manager will come in and say, here's your occupancy level. Here's all your KPIs. And then they'll, attach the reports, following. So you have all the reports you want. You'll have, high level stuff in the write-up. And then if you want to go into details, you can pull out the reports and hit the right details.
Nice.
Exactly.
So.
All right.
We got time for one more question if you got it.
Okay, one more.
Yeah.
All right. So as an asset manager, What is the most significant lesson you've learned the hard way, and what have you done to correct it?
Have options.
Depth. And I think that it's just that know that when you hire someone that there's some depth to that bench, that reserve bench. So like if you have to move on to someone else, it's not your only option. So don't just interview a few people, interview a bunch and always have someone to fall back on, because that person you hire, it may not work out.
They might get sick and have to move. They might just not work out because they're not doing their job. So definitely have options. And especially if you're not in a big metropolitan area where it is, a tertiary area, you want to make sure that there is property management that's willing to come out there beyond the one that you hired.
Yeah. And we've had a lot of problems with management. And I would say that the larger the property you get and the larger the metro, the easier property management is. Okay. So when you're dealing with 24 unit properties, which I know you guys have, it's really hard to find good management. And, if the company, if the company's built around one person, that one person's on vacation, guess what? Your units aren't getting leased that week, and so it is difficult to put really good property management on the smaller properties, number one, and on any size properties in tertiary markets, so just keep that in mind. And there's a lot of good reasons that your larger companies and people who've been investing for a long time typically gravitate towards the larger markets and the larger property sizes. That's because it could be a headache to manage the smaller ones.
And just realize that you may have to do some of that work when the smaller properties, like you don't have a full-time manager usually for the smaller properties. So you may have to do a little bit extra work to make this thing perform. And that's why you're the asset manager. Like my biggest thing is like, if someone says not my job, it's like everything's our job to get this thing performing.
Yeah. So, the amount of times Nic has jumped on a plane for one of our properties that we're leading as the GP, and it's a syndication, it's our responsibility to make sure that it's successful, and it's at the cost of literally anything.
I don't live in Texas. I was there 2 weeks ago.
He's jumped on a plane 5 hours after getting a phone call and flown out there and stayed there for a week to make sure that projects move forward if they're not, or if there's an issue. And he goes out there every month pretty much, and it's not an easy commute.
It's not a set it and forget it. So your job is to make sure this thing performs. Like I think the analogy people always use is we're all on the same plane. We're the pilot. We all want to get to the same destination. So you gotta make sure that thing performs. And like I'm not above. I stayed in one of the units for almost a week when we first took over.
He wanted to see what it looks, what the demographic, was looking like at all hours of the day.
Yeah, go at nighttime to your property. It's a lot different.
Yeah,
that's a great idea to stay in one of the units.
Yeah.
That's great versus just driving in the day and then driving at night. You're actually there. That's great.
See a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
It saves a little money too. I mean, a week's worth of hotels versus, just moving into a vacant unit. It's not as comfortable, but you get to see a lot more. So
we're living on a ship for a while, Brian.
I was gonna say,
yeah,
more space on a ship. Come on,
you do have a lot more space, and it is probably more comfortable than a ship. I mean, hands down. If you have more than 100 square feet of real estate that you can sleep in, it's better than a ship. So
luxury in your own bathroom.
Yeah, right. In some places, 2 bathrooms.
Yeah, I know. You're really lucky,
man. Yeah. So nothing like having to put a towel on, walk out of your room in public to get to the bathroom on a ship. That's just, I love it. But anyway, all right. Well, hey, thanks guys for your time today. We're gonna wrap things up. One question for each one of you guys to wrap things up, and that is, how can listeners learn more about you? Nic and Jamie, you guys get to go first.
Yes. So our website is Hudson, like the river, Hudson Blue, like the color, MF stands for multifamily.com. Our Instagram is Hudson Blue MF.
You can call me, text me, 619-990-8848. That's my cell phone.
All right. And I share a 619 area code. I was stationed in San Diego at one point, and there you go. So, all right. So we got that in the show notes. Anybody who's interested, check out the show notes. Eric, same question for you.
For me, I'm just on Facebook and LinkedIn, and I'll also leave my information in the show notes below.
All right. Sounds good. Perfect. And that's a wrap today. Thanks, guys, once again for coming on the show. And once again, thanks for your service.
Brian, thank you. Appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you so much for having us. And thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Yes, thank you all as well. This has been a pleasure.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure to subscribe. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community yet, which we call the Tribe of Titans, you are missing out. Get 30 days free by clicking the link in the description to this episode, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.